That was the first time I saw Ethan cry like that, not because of pain, but because he had lost everything. And it was Vanessa, the wife I thought would protect him, who pushed my son over the edge. You're listening to Auntie Tales. If this kind of family truth hits home, tap like, drop a 1 if you've ever felt unfairly treated in your own house, and subscribe to Auntie Tales so you won't miss the following story. The sound came first, a thin, strangled breath from the hallway, then the thud of his crutch against the baseboard. I found him in the half-light by the pantry door, shoulders shaking, one hand pressed flat to the wall as if the drywall could hold him together. Outside, the marsh wind worried the live oaks. Inside, our kitchen clock ticked like a metronome for grief. I didn't ask what happened. A mother knows when the answer will hurt more than the question ever did. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed by tears, a 36-year-old man apologizing for being human. "I'm fine, Mom," he said, but his voice had that hollow ring I recognized from the hospital, the one painkillers couldn't fix. I poured him coffee anyway, the way I always did when he was little and woke from nightmare's milk then, black now, but routine is its own kind of prayer. Vanessa didn't come into the kitchen. Her suitcase rolled across the tile in the front hall, wheels whispering. I caught a glimpse of her in the entry mirror, lips perfect, eyes cool as winter water. "Morning," she said, gentle enough for a neighbor. She kissed the air near my cheek and told Ethan she had a quick errand downtown in that careful tone she used when she wanted to sound considerate without actually staying. She wore heels too high for errands. She left a cloud of perfume and a question I didn't want to ask. I turned back to my son. His knuckles had gone white around the mug. "Do you need your brace adjusted?" I offered the small things I could fix. He shook his head and stared at the steam as if it might spell answers. That week had been full of small things. The way she set 2 forks for dinner, but ate in the den with her phone. The way my calls went to voicemail and came back as texts. The way she said, "Ethan needs structure," was like a manager assessing a problem employee. None of it was enough on its own. But if you have lived long enough, you learn to listen when little sounds add up to a siren. Foreshadowing stayed in the corners. A messenger bag by the door that wasn't hers, a new leather folio on the console table, a stack of glossy brochures for coastal investments slipped beneath the charity mailers I still couldn't throw away. I told myself to be fair and kind. Kindness is a good habit until it is a cage. By late morning, the sun had burned through the river fog. I took the laundry to the back room and found the washer lid open, with a silk blouse floating like a lily in the cold water. Old teachers notice forgotten details. I reached to switch the cycle when a vibration buzzed the shelf Vanessa's second phone, the thin one she said she used for client contacts. The screen lit with a preview banner. Title transfer draft ready. Need signatures by Friday. Our house had never felt so loud in its silence. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. The fear rose clean and cold, the kind that clears your vision. I folded Ethan's shirts one by one and set them on the dryer, then went back to the kitchen and cooked through my worry chicken salad, a pan of cornbread, apples sliced thin for a pie I might never bake. Motion steadies you when truth begins to wobble. At noon, Ethan dozed in his recliner, the crutch leaning like a tired friend. His face was slack with exhaustion, lashes still damp. I tucked a throw around his legs and stepped onto the porch for air. Across the cul-de-sac, Mrs. Brewer watered her geraniums, being careful and methodical. She lifted her chin in greeting, then hesitated, as if she had a sentence she wasn't sure she should speak. "You take care now, Maggie," she called, and the way she said it told me she knew something I didn't. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer, but an old habit from the guidance office never left me. Pick up, listen, document. "Holloway residence," I said, and caught my reflection in the microwave door, a woman with silver hair and a mouth set for battle. The line crackled. A man asked for Vanessa in a voice oiled with charm. "Tell her Ryan's on schedule," he said. "Closing date holds if the power of attorney clears. Charleston County won't look too hard if she walks it in, not you-know-who." He laughed, a sound like a door clicking shut. My palm went cold against the handset. Cat back, quietly. I had taught countless teenagers how to recognize manipulation, how to build boundaries and keep them. The final exam is always at home. I found Ethan awake, thumb scrolling through sports headlines he wasn't reading. "Want to sit on the porch?" I asked. He nodded, and we went slow together. One step, breathe. Another step, breathe the way you learn to move through a life that no longer fits. We sat without speaking, and after a while he said, "She says I'm heavy," very softly, as if confessing a crime. He didn't mean wait. A flock of white egrets lifted from the marsh all at once, and the world looked briefly clean. By late afternoon, Vanessa returned with shopping bags. She set them on the counter and smiled at Ethan. "I got you the protein powder you like," she said, as if love were a receipt. She tapped her phone, eyes glittering. "I might run back out, though. Traffic's better after 6. I rinsed apples in the sink. Steady hands, steady breath." "Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Who's Ryan?" She didn't flinch. She just blinked, calculating which story to tell to which audience. "A client," she answered. "Why?" She slid a knife from the block and began to cut limes that didn't belong to any recipe we ate. "You look tense, Maggie. You should rest." It would have been easy to accuse her, to fling the phone on the counter with every message flashing, but I have seen what panic does to a cornered liar. It makes them dangerous. I chose something small instead. "Please stop using his brace as a towel rack," I said, and put the apples in a bowl. You'd be surprised what people reveal when you refuse to argue their favorite subject. She laughed and left her half-cut limes, the green crescents slick as bait. Her heels ticked down the hall, then softened on the rug. A door clicked. 10 breaths later, I heard her voice through the thin wall of the guest room, lowered but urgent. "I told you. Friday. He'll sign. He's fragile, he trusts me. And if he balks, I have a way." Climax came quietly, not loudly. I stepped closer because I needed to hear every word. "No, we can't involve her," she said, meaning me. "She reads everything." Papers rustled. "Power of attorney, special, not general. I'll walk it through. After closing, we're out Savannah or Naples. I don't care. He can keep the furniture if he wants." A pause, then a laugh I hadn't heard since the wedding toasts. "Ryan, listen. If he won't sign, I can sign on his behalf. He's medicated half the time." "Who's gonna prove it?" I stood very still in the hallway, hands open, as if the house had asked me to surrender. And then I remembered the teenagers who used to cry in my office, the ones who thought they were weak because someone told them so. I remembered telling them they were not. I went to my room, pulled the banker's box from under the bed, the box with tax returns, the deed, the letters Ethan wrote from job sites in Texas and Wyoming, sweat smudges on the envelopes. I set the box on the quilt and began to make a list. Dates, names, numbers, truths. At dusk, the neighborhood settled into its routines, dog walkers, porch lights brightening one by one, the river taking the sky's last color. I made sandwiches for dinner and cut them into triangles because sometimes you need a small kindness that's easy to swallow. Ethan thanked me, eating carefully, attentive as a person learning to trust his hands again. Vanessa said she wasn't hungry. When the dishwasher hummed, I slipped outside with the trash. The air had turned calm and honest. Across the way, Mrs. Brewer set a paper bag by our mailbox, her back straight, her movements deliberate. A neighborly gesture left over muffins, perhaps. But when I opened the bag in the lamplight, I found a small USB drive tucked beneath a note. "For you. I'm sorry." I don't remember going back inside. I remember the kitchen chair, the laptop, the long exhale before I clicked play. And then there it was, Vanessa's voice, clear as glass, saying exactly what my heart already knew. She had no idea that behind those seemingly harmless gestures lay a plan that had been long in motion. And now, I would have to face a darker truth. I pressed play again, just to be sure. But the voice didn't change. It was still her, my daughter-in-law, cool, precise, selling away the only home my son had ever built with his own hands. The video was grainy, shot from the side porch. Vanessa stood by her car, phone to her ear, telling someone, "He'll sign tomorrow. He's too weak to argue." My hands trembled, not from age, but from fury that had nowhere to land. I had spent half my life teaching young people to recognize abuse cloaked as affection, yet here it was, unfolding in my own house. The morning light looked different after that. Even the walls seemed to listen. When Ethan woke, I hid the USB under the bread box. He didn't need more pain until I had a plan. He looked better, less pale, more determined, but when he tried to stand, his leg buckled and his hand slammed the table. The mug broke, coffee running like blood across the tile. I knelt to clean it, and he whispered, "Mom, maybe she's right. Maybe I'm holding her back." Those words were sharper than glass. "You built this house, Ethan. You don't need to apologize for existing inside it." He looked away, cheeks hollow, and said nothing. Sometimes silence is what defeat sounds like. Outside, Charleston hummed with its usual rhythm, shrimp boats in the harbor, church bells marking the hour. Still, inside our home, everything tilted slightly off-center. The refrigerator hummed louder. The hallway smelled of her perfume even after she'd gone. I opened windows to let in the autumn air and tried to remember the woman Vanessa had been, the girl who once brought peach pie to Sunday dinner, the one who called me Mom. But memory has a cruel sense of humor. It preserves the laughter long after the warmth is gone. By afternoon, I found the courage to visit Mrs. Brewer. She was watering her plants again, hands steady as confession. When I thanked her for the muffins, she didn't deny it. I couldn't sleep, she said quietly. I saw her meet that man twice by the fence. Didn't want to meddle, but she trailed off. In small towns, gossip is currency, but compassion is the rarer coin. I promised to be careful. That evening, the doorbell rang. Vanessa's parents were at the door. They came dressed for pity, designer jackets, polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Her mother looked around the living room as if checking inventory. "You should be resting more, Maggie," she said sweetly. "It must be hard managing the house with Ethan like this." Her husband nodded, his cologne filling the room. "Vanessa worries about him. Says he's depressed, maybe unstable. We just want what's best for everyone." I almost laughed. Best for everyone meant best for their daughter. "Ethan's recovering," I replied evenly, "and the house isn't going anywhere." Her father's smile sharpened. Of course, but the market's hot. Maybe it's time to simplify, move closer to family." He glanced at the framed photo of Ethan on the fireplace, young, strong, sunburned, holding the first brick of this very foundation. I realized they weren't here for tea. They were here for the deed. When they left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I could almost feel the house itself recoiling, its wood remembering too many broken promises. Upstairs, Vanessa's laughter drifted from her call. She spoke in the soft tone she once used with Ethan. I heard the words transfer, bank, and signature. Later that night, I stood at the window watching rain smear the porch light into streaks. Ethan sat by the fireplace, a sketch pad open, pencil unmoving. "You ever feel," he said slowly, "like everything you worked for is slipping out of your hands, and you're too tired to grab it back?" I wanted to tell him about the USB, about the neighbors and the parents and the lies stacking up like unpaid bills. But he looked so worn, so fragile, I only said, "That's when you let someone else hold it for a while." He smiled then, small but real, and that's when I decided no more waiting. The next morning, I drove into town under a sky the color of pewter. Charleston's courthouse district smelled of wet asphalt and magnolias. I hadn't walked those marble steps in years. Grace Myers's office was still on the corner, above the bakery where Ethan once bought Vanessa croissants on Sundays. Time folds cruelly like that. Grace looked up from her desk and froze. "Maggie Holloway," she said, voice half awe, half warning. "You retired 15 years ago. What brings you here?" "An old mistake," I answered. "And a new one wearing designer heels." We talked for an hour. I showed her the USB, the phone screenshot, and the notes. Grace's brow furrowed. "This is criminal if verified. Forgery, coercion, elder manipulation." She stopped, studying my face. "Are you ready to go back into a courtroom?" "I'm ready to protect my son," I said. She leaned back, a smile ghosting across her lips. "Then let's wake the law, Maggie." By evening, I returned home to find the lights dimmed. Vanessa sat at the table, eyes red but dry. "Your son wants to talk," she said flatly, and called him from the hallway. Ethan wheeled in, face tight. "Vanessa says you've been interfering," he began. "Mom, she feels unsafe. Did you follow her?" Her words, through his mouth. I saw how carefully she had rehearsed them. "Ethan," I said softly, "do you trust me?" He hesitated just a breath too long, and that pause told me everything. Vanessa stepped forward. "She's tired, Ethan. She forgets things. Maybe it's time to think about guardianship before she hurts herself or us." That broke something deep inside me. The woman who once thanked me for raising the most gentle man now painted me as senile. But the fury that rose in me was clean, almost holy. "If you're going to lie," I said quietly, "at least be brave enough to look me in the eye while you do it." For the first time, her composure slipped. A tremor in the chin, a flicker of guilt or fear. Ethan looked between us, confused, cornered. "Enough," he said finally. "We'll talk tomorrow." I nodded, turned to the sink, and began washing dishes that weren't dirty. Behind me, Vanessa whispered something low, sharp, victorious. When they went upstairs, I dried my hands, opened the bread box, and retrieved the USB. I slipped it into my coat pocket next to my old courtroom badge, the one I hadn't worn since retirement. The house creaked as if holding its breath. Tomorrow would bring daylight, and with it, the truth. I barely slept that night. Every tick of the clock felt like a question I couldn't answer. At 5 a.m, I gave up trying, made coffee, and stood by the kitchen window watching the river fog lift from the water. The world outside was quiet, too quiet, like the pause before a storm breaks. Ethan's crutch leaned against the wall, a silent reminder of everything we'd lost and everything we were about to lose if I didn't act. When Vanessa came down, she looked immaculate, hair polished, perfume sharp. "Morning," she said, as if last night's venom had never been spoken. She poured herself a glass of orange juice, left it half full, and checked her phone. "I have an appointment in town," she added lightly. "You don't need to wait up." She didn't look at me. That was her power, pretending not to see the damage she caused. After she left, the house exhaled. I carried the box of documents to the dining table. I had kept every paper, every receipt since Ethan's accident, hospital bills, rehab payments, insurance forms. All those months of fear folded neatly into manila envelopes. I laid them out like soldiers before battle, and as I read through them, something clicked. She'd filed for joint ownership of Ethan's recovery account 2 weeks after the wedding. Not a day before, not a day after. Planned precision. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. Ethan wheeled in quietly, eyes tired. "Mom," he said, "I need to ask you something. Vanessa says you've been talking to a lawyer." I froze, so she knew. "Grace called to check on me," I said carefully. "You remember Grace, my old colleague. I asked her for advice." He frowned, uneasy. "She said you were planning something legal. Vanessa's scared you'll make things worse." "She's scared I'll find the truth," I said, my voice lower than I expected. "And Ethan, I already have." He rubbed his temples, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, I can't handle another fight. I just need peace." "Peace isn't the same as surrender," I told him, but he was already wheeling away. The afternoon dragged. I busied myself cleaning, dusting, and polishing things that didn't need polishing. When you can't control the people you love, you control the shine on the silverware. Around 3, a car pulled up outside a dark sedan with tinted windows. I watched through the lace curtains as Vanessa stepped out, joined by a man in a navy suit. Ryan, the one from the phone calls. They didn't see me. I stood still as they walked toward the porch, their voices muffled but close enough for me to hear laughter. Laughter has a different sound when it's bought with betrayal. They went inside, the lock turning like a verdict. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Finally, I took my phone and started recording, my heart pounding against my ribs. Their voices carried from the living room. "Once it's signed, we list it fast," Ryan was saying. "She can't block it if the bank believes you're the executor." Vanessa laughed softly. "Ethan's too weak to question anything. His mother's the problem, but she'll be gone soon. He's considering assisted living." That last sentence sliced through me. Gone soon. Assisted living. Like I was a chore they meant to cross off. I took a step closer, enough to catch her reflection in the glass cabinet. She was holding Ethan's signature sheet, running her fingers over the ink like it belonged to her. Ryan kissed her on the cheek and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then the doorbell rang. It was Grace. Her sudden presence startled them both. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced," she said smoothly. "I'm here to deliver some paperwork for Mrs. Holloway." She handed me a folder, her eyes flashing a quick warning. "Play along." I nodded, my hands steady though my pulse roared. Vanessa's smile faltered. "Paperwork? For Maggie?" she repeated, her voice too bright. Grace adjusted her glasses, glancing at Ryan. "Just a small verification about the property title. Routine review for the county." She let the silence stretch until Ryan excused himself, muttering about a call. Vanessa followed him to the porch, whispering urgently. As soon as the door shut, Grace leaned close. "I checked the registry. The transfer hasn't gone through yet. You have maybe 48 hours before it does." "What do I do?" I asked. "You collect proof, and then we take this to court." When Vanessa came back, she looked suspicious. "What did she say?" I smiled. She brought me recipes for Christmas pie. Her brow furrowed. Lying didn't suit her as well when someone else did it. That evening, Ethan refused dinner. He stayed upstairs, the soft murmur of the television his only company. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the folder Grace had given me. Inside were blank affidavits, sample statements, and a sticky note in Grace's handwriting. Document everything, especially her voice. I glanced toward the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of conversation upstairs, Ethan and Vanessa. I couldn't catch words, but I didn't need to. I'd heard enough to know which way the wind was blowing. By midnight, the house slept. I walked the halls barefoot, my reflection flickering in the dark windows. Every step creaked like a confession. In Ethan's office, the computer glowed with a faint light Vanessa's doing, no doubt. I sat down, heart thudding, and checked the open tabs. Legal forms, banking transfers, property sales. She'd even drafted an email to a realtor. Urgent list before holidays. Owner unavailable due to medical reasons. She wasn't even waiting for him to be gone. She was already living with his absence. I saved screenshots, sent them to Grace, and shut down the computer. Then I went back to my room and opened the box of old letters again. Inside, beneath the tax files, I found a photo of Ethan as a child, standing by his father's half-built workshop, with sawdust in his hair and pride shining in his eyes. I touched the picture gently. "You built things to last," I whispered. "Now I have to do the same." At dawn, I heard the front door open, Vanessa's heels on the porch. Leaving early again, I waited until her car turned the corner before stepping outside. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, the kind that promise rain but never deliver it right away. The mailbox flag was up. Inside, an envelope addressed to Mrs. Vanessa Holloway, but the return address read Coleman Private Investigations. I stared at it, confused. My pulse quickened. The name on the card inside was Peter Coleman, investigator, with a short note scribbled, "Mr. Graves recommended you. Files ready pickup tomorrow." I didn't know who Graves was or what files they had, but suddenly, I wasn't the only one watching her. Someone else had seen through the mask. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel helpless. I felt the ground shift in my favor. Tomorrow, I would find out who Peter Coleman was, and why Vanessa Cole, my son's wife, was hiding from more than just me. The morning after I found the card from Peter Coleman, I dressed not like a retired school counselor or a tired widow, but like the woman I used to be before life taught me to apologize for being strong. A navy blazer, pressed slacks, and a white blouse that still held the faint scent of starch. I didn't know what kind of man Peter was, but if he worked with Vanessa, he had seen enough deceit to recognize another kind when it walked through his door. Charleston's downtown was waking up coffee shops, spilling warmth into the cold, courthouse bells marking the hour. His office was on Broad Street, above a pawn shop and across from an old bank. I climbed the stairs slowly, steady but deliberate, the way you do when you're stepping back into a past self you're not sure still fits. The door read Coleman Investigations. I knocked once. He was younger than I expected, early 40s maybe, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who'd spent years untangling lies. "Mrs. Holloway?" he asked, standing. "You're not the woman I was expecting." "Neither is she," I said simply. He smiled faintly, gesturing toward the chair. "You're here about Vanessa Cole, I presume?" "Aye, Saturday. So she used her maiden name." He nodded, opening a file. "She contacted me 6 months ago under that name, said she needed background checks for a potential investor. But the payments came from multiple accounts under different aliases. Something felt off." He pulled out a photograph, a man in his late 50s, standing in front of a dealership. "This man, Tom Graves, hired me afterwards, said his business had been swindled by the same woman. She convinced him to front a loan for a fake charity event, then disappeared." Sound familiar? Every breath I'd been holding since this nightmare began left my lungs, so it wasn't just us. "No, ma'am," he said gently. "Vanessa, or whatever name she's using now, has a pattern. She finds vulnerable men, usually with inheritance or disability settlements, gains access to their assets, then moves on." I stared at the file. Photos, receipts, emails, all of it right there, proof that my son wasn't her first victim and probably wouldn't be her last. "She's planning to leave soon," I said, "with a man named Ryan." He flipped through the folder until he found a note. "Ryan Mercer. I've seen that name. He's under investigation for money laundering tied to property flipping." He looked up, voice firm. You need to go to the authorities before she drains you dry. I'm already working with an attorney, I said, thinking of Grace. But I need to make sure my son isn't blamed. He's sick. She's turned him against me. Peter's eyes softened. Then you need to take her down the right way. Paperwork, timestamps, evidence, no confrontation until you're ready. As I left his office, the wind caught my hair, sharp and cold off the harbor. For the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't despair. It was purpose steady, terrifying, but clean. I walked straight to Grace's office with the folder under my arm. Grace looked up, surprise flickering into admiration. You really went and did it. I found her past, I said. Now I want to end her future. We spent hours cross-referencing the files, matching the names, bank records, and signatures. The deeper we went, the clearer the picture became. Vanessa wasn't just manipulative, she was calculated. Her fake charities, shell accounts, and even marriage licenses were all part of a chain, a quiet empire of deception. At sunset, Grace leaned back, rubbing her eyes. This is enough to take to the DA. If you want to do this, we'll file first thing Monday. I'll be there, I said. When I got home that night, the house was empty. Vanessa hadn't returned yet. On the counter sat a note in her handwriting, "Dinner with Ryan, don't wait up." Ethan's chair was missing from its usual spot by the window. Panic gripped my throat until I heard voices from the porch. He was outside, whispering with a neighbor, face lit by the porch light. Relief flooded me. He came in a few minutes later, looking worn but calm. "Mom," he said quietly, "Vanessa told me you were trying to ruin her reputation." "Reputation?" I laughed, the sound bitter. She did that herself. He sighed. "She said you hired someone to follow her. Is that true?" I hesitated. I didn't hire anyone, but someone was already following her and not for me. He frowned, unsure what to believe. "I just want everyone to stop fighting." "I know, sweetheart," I said softly, "but sometimes the only way to stop a fight is to finish it." That night, as I washed the dishes, I saw a car idling across the street. Not Ryan's. A different one. Sleek, black, windows tinted, watching. I pulled the curtain closed. The quiet war had begun, and I was no longer afraid of the battlefield. The next morning, Grace called. "The DA's agreed to meet you this afternoon. Bring everything." Her voice dropped lower. "Maggie, once this starts, there's no going back." "Good," I said. "I'm tired of turning back." At the courthouse, the air was sharp with the scent of disinfectant and nerves. The DA was young, polite, and skeptical, but when Grace handed over the files and recordings, his expression changed. "This is serious. You've got fraud, coercion, and possibly elder exploitation. We'll issue a temporary freeze on Ethan's accounts immediately." When I stepped outside, the sky had turned gold, a color that promises rain. I felt lighter, almost free. But freedom has a price, it demands truth, and truth rarely stays buried quietly. When I got home, Vanessa's car was in the driveway. The front door was open. Inside, her suitcase was half packed, the closet stripped. She was on the phone, pacing, voice tight. "They froze the account. How? Who could have—" She stopped when she saw me. For the first time since she entered our lives, Vanessa looked afraid. "What did you do?" she hissed. I set my purse down calmly. I told the truth. That's all. She took a step toward me, trembling with fury. "You ruined everything." "No," I said softly. "You did." She raised a hand as if to strike me, then thought better of it. "You'll regret this, Maggie. You and your crippled son. You think anyone will believe a bitter old woman?" I met her eyes. "The court will, and so will he." Behind us, a voice broke the silence. Ethan, standing at the doorway, eyes wide. "Vanessa, what did you call me?" Her mouth opened, then shut. The damage was done. He looked from her to me, realization dawning like sunrise after a storm. "Mom," he said slowly, "what's happening?" "Justice," I whispered. "It's finally waking up." The next day would bring the courtroom, the judge, and the truth too heavy to run from. But that night, as the house fell into uneasy silence, I sat by the fire, the old photo of Ethan and his father in my lap, and I smiled for the first time in months. Because now, the war was no longer quiet. It had a voice, and it was mine. When I walked into the courtroom, the air felt heavy, thick with perfume, nerves, and 100 unspoken accusations. The marble floors gleamed too brightly, and the benches creaked with quiet tension. It was strange being back here after so many years, strangers still, to stand on the other side of the bench, no longer the calm counselor or the witness, but the mother who had come to watch her son's name be defended. Ethan sat beside Grace at the plaintiff's table, pale but steady. His hands trembled slightly, and I wanted to reach out to steady them, but I didn't. This battle had to be his, too. Vanessa sat across from us, her beauty polished and brittle, like a porcelain doll that knew it was about to fall. Her lawyer, Jennifer Holt, was a familiar face, a woman I'd once mentored in law seminars years ago. Time had turned her into someone colder, sharper. The judge, Stephen Rowan, entered silver-haired, dignified. I had worked with him once, decades ago. His eyes met mine briefly, and I could tell he recognized me. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, then respect. "Court is now in session," he said, voice firm but fair. Vanessa's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client has been unjustly accused of fraud and coercion by her husband's mother. We intend to prove that Mrs. Holloway's claims are the result of paranoia and an unfortunate decline in her mental faculties." The words landed like stones in my chest. I'd known she would attack my age, my memory, my sanity. It was the oldest trick in the book, making the woman look crazy so that no one would listen when she told the truth. Grace rose next, her voice calm but steady. "We intend to prove that Mrs. Holloway's actions were the result of evidence, not emotion, and that the defendant, Vanessa Cole, engaged in a deliberate, repeated pattern of financial exploitation of vulnerable individuals." A low murmur spread through the gallery. The judge's gavel struck once. "Proceed." The first hours were slow documents, cross-examinations, endless questions about signatures and dates, but I watched Vanessa closely. Her smile faded with every exhibit Grace presented. The bank records, the emails, the recordings. Her mask began to crack around the edges. When Grace played the audio from the USB, Vanessa's voice sang, "He's too weak to argue. I'll sign for him if I have to." The room went silent. Every person in that courtroom could hear it. The cruelty beneath her calm tone, the arrogance of someone who believed no one would ever hold her accountable. Jennifer stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. That recording was obtained illegally." But Grace was ready. "Not illegal, Your Honor. It was provided by a neighbor who witnessed suspicious activity and voluntarily turned it in to law enforcement. Chain of custody verified." The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Overruled. Continue." Vanessa's hands clenched in her lap. Her lawyer whispered furiously, but the damage was already done. I watched her chest rise and fall faster. Her facade began to crumble. Ethan stared at the table, tears sliding silently down his face. I wanted to reach for him, but I knew he needed to face it to see the truth, to feel the betrayal that had hollowed him out for months. When Grace called Peter Coleman to the stand, the tension thickened. He testified calmly, showing the files, the photos, the chain of fake identities Vanessa had used. Each name was another nail in her coffin. Jennifer tried to discredit him, to paint him as an opportunist. "Mr. Coleman, you were paid to find this, were you not?" He nodded. "Yes, but I didn't know the client was her, the same woman who hired me to cover her trail." The room stirred again. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. By the time Grace called me to the stand, I was trembling not from fear, but from something more profound. I swore to tell the truth, my voice steady, though my hands weren't. Grace's questions were gentle, measured. "Mrs. Holloway, what made you suspect your daughter-in-law was deceiving your son?" I told the story not as an accusation, but as a memory. The nights of silence, the missing funds, the way Vanessa's words turned Ethan against me little by little. I spoke of the phone calls, the papers, the moment I heard her voice confess what she was doing. I didn't cry. I had already done all my crying in the dark. Jennifer cross-examined next. Her tone was sweet at first. "Mrs. Holloway, you said you retired from law decades ago, correct? Is it possible that time has clouded your recollection?" I met her gaze. "The only thing that's clouded in this courtroom," I said quietly, "is your client's conscience." A ripple of whispers spread. The judge struck his gavel, but he was hiding a faint smile. Grace stood again. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to play one more recording." It was the voicemail Vanessa had left on Ryan's phone the night she discovered the account had been frozen. Her voice was panicked, furious. "That old woman's ruined everything. If I go down, I'm taking Ethan's name with me." You could have heard a pin drop. The judge looked from me to Vanessa. "Mrs. Cole, do you wish to make a statement?" Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no words. Grace spoke softly. No further questions. When the judge called a short recess, Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. She turned toward the exit, face pale. "I need air," she muttered, pushing past the guard. I watched her go, her heels echoing down the marble hallway. The door shut behind her like the final note of a requiem. I sat down slowly, every muscle trembling. Ethan turned to me, eyes red but clear. "Mom," he whispered, "you were right. I didn't want to believe it, but you were right." I brushed his cheek, the way I had when he was a boy. "You don't have to say that, honey. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't ever let someone make you doubt what you know in your bones." He nodded, gripping my hand. Outside the courtroom, I caught sight of Vanessa through the window, standing on the steps, phone to her ear, eyes darting wildly. Then she vanished down the street. That was the last time I saw her free. Because when the court reconvened an hour later, the bailiff entered with a folded paper and whispered something to the judge. He read it, expression unreadable. "Mrs. Cole has been detained by county officers," he announced. "Charges of fraud and obstruction pending investigation." The gallery erupted. Grace exhaled, Ethan buried his face in his hands, and I finally let myself breathe. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't even a victory. It was relief. The quiet kind that comes when the truth, at last, is too loud to be ignored. And as I left the courtroom, the sound of the gavel echoed behind me like a door closing, or perhaps finally, one opening. The morning after the verdict, the house finally felt still again. No footsteps pacing in the hallway, no perfume hanging in the air, no tension coiled under every word. Just the quiet hum of the heater and the soft creak of old wood, the kind of silence that doesn't demand explanation. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the marsh grass shimmer under the pale winter light. Charleston was waking up slow, and for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what the day would bring. Ethan was asleep in the living room, his leg propped up, the morning sun drawing a stripe of gold across his blanket. His face looked younger somehow, like the man he used to be before life and love conspired to bruise him. When he stirred, I went to check on him. "How are you feeling?" I asked softly. "Tired," he said, then smiled faintly, but lighter, like I can breathe again. That was enough. The trial had ended with clarity, not celebration. The judge's voice still echoed in my head, steady, final, almost tender as he said, "Mrs. Cole, you are hereby found guilty of fraud, coercion, and document falsification." I'd watched Vanessa's face crumble as the gavel struck, watched her hand reach for the lawyer who quietly stepped back, no longer her ally, and in that moment I didn't feel triumph. I felt grief for the woman she could have been, for the damage she left behind, for my son who had to learn too late what trust really costs. The newspapers referred to it as the Holloway case, but I refused to give interviews. Truth doesn't need publicity, it needs peace. The neighbors stopped by with casseroles and flowers, unsure what to say but desperate to show support. Mrs. Brewer came last, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You did what most people wouldn't have the strength to do," she said. "You fought for what's right." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "No," I said. "I fought for what was left." That evening, Grace came over with a bottle of cider and 2 glasses. We sat on the porch, the river dark and wide before us. "You could have asked for restitution," she said gently. "You gave up a lot of money." "I didn't want her money," I said. "I just wanted my son's dignity back. And mine." Grace nodded, understanding. She'd seen too many women my age worn down by silence, by pretending not to see betrayal when it was staring them in the face. "You know," she said, "you remind me of someone I once knew." "Who?" She smiled. "A younger version of you." We laughed, a sound light enough to carry into the dusk. Later that night, when the house was dark, I took out the small box from under my bed, the one with the old photos, the wedding ring Dennis had left me, the letters Ethan wrote when he was little. I added one more item, the silver bracelet Vanessa once gave me for Mother's Day, still shining like it hadn't been worn by deceit. I closed the lid gently, sealing it away with the rest of the things that no longer owned me. When I stepped outside, the wind had changed. The sky above the river was streaked with lavender, and a heron glided low over the water, wings wide and patient. I thought about Dennis, how he used to say that justice wasn't about punishment, but about balance. That every lie eventually meets its equal truth. I finally understood what he meant. Ethan came to stand beside me. "Mom," he said, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I told him. "Just promise me you'll live differently. You'll love smarter, and when you see warning signs, don't ignore them for the sake of keeping peace." He nodded. "I will. I want to make this house ours again." Together, we started that very night. We boxed up the things she'd left: the dresses, the perfume, the jewelry she'd bought with money that wasn't hers. Ethan wanted to throw them away, but I told him no. "Let's donate them," I said. "Something good should come out of something rotten." He smiled, and for the first time I saw the spark of pride returning to his eyes. Days turned into weeks. The wounds began to close, not with forgetting, but with acceptance. Some evenings we cooked together: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of comfort food that fills a house with warmth again. Grace stopped by often, sometimes with work papers, sometimes with gossip. And Peter Coleman sent one last note: "Case closed. You did well, Mrs. Holloway." Still, there were moments when the quiet made me ache. I would find myself glancing toward the porch, half expecting to hear heels on the wood or laughter that no longer belonged here. But those ghosts were lighter now, like shadows at sunset, visible but fading. One morning, I found Ethan at the garage, polishing the old Shelby Mustang Dennis had restored decades ago. The same car Vanessa once called a relic. He ran his hand over the hood, eyes shining. "Dad would have wanted us to keep it," he said. I smiled. "Then let's make it run again." And we did. We spent 3 weekends fixing what time had dulled, changing parts, repainting, rebuilding piece by piece. When the engine finally roared back to life, it sounded like a sigh of relief, not of Vanessa, but of ourselves. That evening, we drove down the coast road with the windows down, the salty air rushing in. Charleston's lights shimmered in the distance, and the world for once didn't feel cruel. Ethan turned to me at a red light. "Do you ever regret not walking away sooner?" I thought for a long moment. "No," I said, "because walking away too soon would have meant I never learned how strong I could be." He smiled, and when the light turned green, we drove on. Life didn't return to what it was before, it never does, but it settled into something honest. And honesty, I learned, is a luxury too many families trade away for the illusion of harmony. If you're listening to my story tonight, maybe you felt it too: the sting of betrayal, the weight of pretending everything's fine when it isn't. Perhaps you've stood where I stood, between love and truth, wondering which one will break you first. But I'll tell you this: love without honesty isn't love at all. It's debt. And one day, the bill always comes due. So hold your ground, protect your heart, know your worth, and when someone tries to rewrite your story, pick up the pen and write it back in your own hand. Justice doesn't die, it just waits for someone brave enough to wake it. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against a family member? If you have, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your strength. And if my story moved you, leave a number 1 and subscribe to Auntie Tales, where stories like this remind us, no matter what they take from you, they can't take your truth.